Okay, I'm delighted to welcome Achi from Migrants at Work onto this Scotland Against Modern Slavery podcast. Achi has been had a real interesting conversation after an introduction that I had to Achi with the great work that he's doing with regards to labour exploitation, in particular the asylum seeker refugee population in the UK. But he has a story to tell first, I think, which is really important. So Achi, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sean. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to try to raise this issue, which have been neglected for the past 25 years, really, since 1996. So thank you so much.
Well, no problem at all. I'm delighted to have you on. And I think it's a bit of a journey for me to get you on to this podcast, because there's a relevance to what we're about to talk about and the issue of migrant labour, I suppose, post-Brexit. Let's get this on the table. But Achi, you have a story. You were a victim. You were a victim of human trafficking or modern slavery, sorry, and where you originally come from in the Ivory Coast. Can you tell us a little bit about that story, please?
So originally, I'm from the Ivory Coast. There is a little village called Akupe in West Africa, in a country called Ivory Coast. So I grew up there. My childhood was really about spending time with my family in a cocoa plantation, coffee plantation, pineapple. So on a daily basis, really, my life was to go to field with my family, with my mom, my dad, my brothers, and my sisters. So that was our life, really. While in Europe, some children may be playing football, having fun. We were having fun in a different way. It was in the plantation. So many people would call me a child laborer. The international community would call me a child laborer under the definition of the ILO convention. But for me, as far as I was concerned, I was not a child laborer. I was just working with my family to try to survive, because we didn't have any other way, really. That's how it is. Some people are lucky to be able to, to have the means to survive. But for many of us, who grew up in Africa, where, to be honest, the state doesn't really care much about us. You just do whatever you do. And if your family are, if you're born in a family of farmers, you just follow life, really, and try to survive,
So to me, that your story actually sounds very similar to many stories that I've heard over the years, but the common theme is that you didn't realize that you were, this was just life. This wasn't exploitation to you. This is just who you were growing up, how your family was. Is that?
Well, yeah, exactly. Like I said, the people seeing me and hearing me talking about my story, my life, they say, well, that's not right. You shouldn't be working in a plantation. You should be in school. And I would agree, I should be in school. But it's life, I was born in a country and in a family where we did not have what many people have. We do not have this, opportunity for as children to enjoy a normal life children are having. But this does not mean that I had a bad life. I was with my family, and many of the children do not have that opportunity. You have children who are being trafficked to do the work I was doing. So I was lucky. In a way, I was lucky. I was doing that with my family, who was taking care of me, for us to be able to survive. So that's where there is a distinction. When you talk about child labor, everybody they put us children in the same basket, but you have free group of children when we talk about child labor. And I think it's really important to understand, to make that distinction, to be able to tackle the issue on the ground. And that is really important.
Well, that's a story and a half. Okay, so tell me, I hear a lot when the more people I talk to, sometimes you think nothing will shock you, but that's been your life. That was you growing up. So I mean, let's talk a little bit more about, what we're here to talk about. So I'm, making some assumptions here, which are always very dangerous. You've ended up in the UK, so there's been a process from UK, getting from the Ivory Coast to the UK, and then about the work that you're doing. So what happened then? Why did you end up here?
Again, so when you look at, again, the international law and when they talk about child trafficking or human trafficking, I can say that I went through a similar process, but the process I went through, I cannot fall into the definition of trafficking. So what happened is that my family, my mom and my dad sent me to our relatives in France. Okay, so me and my sister, without any adult, I was 10 at the time. My sister was 12. They just took us to the airport. We took the plane, so from Ivory Coast to France, and then we met over relative in France, who then took us from France, from Paris, where we landed, to another city in France. So that's the journey we have made to Europe. Okay, so you have many who were not lucky, who've been sent by the family overseas to work, or to be able to have this opportunity to have a better life in Europe, where they end up being mistreated, being used as as worker in the house. So they're being really abused. The family in the first place sent them to give them this opportunity to work, to improve their life, but in the end, they end up being abused by these other family members. So which was not my case. So even though I was in a way sent from one country to another, but I was not abused at the end. But I went through this process. Like I said, many other people do not have this chance to arrive in a country they don't know anyone, or when they know their relatives, they're being exploited. But I was not exploited. So I went through the process, but the end result was different.
And I'll take this, a stage further, Aki, so that, you've touched on, people that are coming from other countries post-Brexit. I'm not going to hold back that, anyone who's not a UK national who isn't on the highly skilled, visa program, then if they're coming to the UK, they're coming to the UK, and they're at huge risk of being exploited. So we're seeing, it's probably something that we didn't look at deeply enough before when we had people that were willing to do the jobs that the UK nationals predominantly weren't taking up. We had a European migrant workforce, or the European workforce, that was taking up those jobs. Now they've gone home, or they've settled and moved on. And we have these gaps in the labour market, these massive gaps. There's around 1.24 million vacancies in the UK economy just now. And it made me think, and you've just been really clear on this, is that there's a whole population of people that have come to the UK, they've come for a better life, they've escaping persecution, whatever situation it may be. And as they go through the process with the UK Home Office to get status and eligibility to work and live in the UK, they're not allowed to work up to a point. And with the money that they earn, it would be a struggle for them to live on. So they're immediately an at-risk population. And if you couple that with the fact that we have these massive gaps in the labour market, that these people potentially illegally could fill, or there's unscrupulous criminality that could try and come behind it, this is the concern, and this is what we're seeing a little bit more in business. And there's also a desperation in the business community as well, that are looking to plug these gaps. So will they turn a blind eye? Will they just let that man who says he can bring 10 people in to finish that job and not ask any questions, will they let it happen? And we are seeing evidence of that happening, particularly over the last year. So I suppose for me, there's a concern, and it's opened my eyes about the exploitation of those people waiting. But I think, first of all, let's just clarify some points and get some definitions out the way for anyone listening. So, knowing the work that you do, and I know that, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but, so people are talking about refugees, asylum seekers, and there's a lot in the press, you know, can't hide from that in the UK, that maybe paints a very bleak picture of what these people are here to do. But sometimes I think we forget the UK, we've got a country that's made of migration. You know, waves and waves, historic migration. I'm up here in Scotland. I'm in a city called Glasgow, and it was built on migration. This is, you know, industry, Irish migration, European migration, Asian migration. It's all been part of the makeup, the genetics of the city. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. So sorry, I'm getting carried away, Achi. So carried away. It's not a history lesson, sorry, but I was really keen to get. Can you talk to me the definitions? You know, refugees, asylum seekers. What does this all mean then to somebody listening?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think it's really, really important to understand this definition and who is a migrant, who is a refugee, and who is an asylum seeker, and who is an undocumented migrant worker, who is a regular migrant worker, who is disqualified. And the reason why it's really important, because if you get the term wrong, some people may deny the right they're entitled to. So, and that is really important. So a migrant would be, for example, somebody like me who came from Ivory Coast to France, and then from France to the UK. An asylum seeker would be somebody who is seeking asylum for whatever reason, who has left in country, was forced to live in his country and seeking asylum in another country. So I'm not going to go into the definition of the refugee convention because it is too technical and illegal, but it's somebody who leave his country to another one to seek asylum because of persecution. So, and if that person has made an application, that person is an asylum seeker until that person get granted status, then that person will remain asylum seeker. Once that person has been granted status, then that person will become a refugee. So refugees, in terms of their right to work, the refugee or asylum seeker and migrant, the right are completely different. So if you mix an asylum seeker and a refugee and migrant, you might end up in a workplace, you might end up denying the right to work of a refugee, thinking that he's an asylum seeker when he's not. You know, and there are some asylum seekers who have the legal right to work. Because if you look at a group of asylum seekers, there are three groups of asylum seekers in terms of the right to work. So if you do not understand this group of asylum seekers, you may allow some asylum seekers who do not have the right to work, you may allow them to work when in fact they don't have the right to work. And those who have the right to work, you may deny them this opportunity because you think they're asylum seekers.
And that, I don't think that there's some clarity there, and I have some real life experience because, you know, we know well in my day job and my business job, I work for Brightwork Staffline. It's the biggest recruitment agency in Scotland and the UK, and we have a very stringent way of checking people's rights to work. But I remember meeting a victim of sexual exploitation who had been put on the shortage occupation list. Able to work, but only for certain categories of work. And this was quite, you know, high level engineering, you know, ballet dancer, you know, medical professional, and he didn't have any qualifications. And so we couldn't put him out, we couldn't get him to work. But what he said to me is, well, don't worry, Shan, the agency at the other end of the road, they've got me out working as a cleaner. And that's all I wanted. But I had to explain to him he's at risk because he's not supposed to be doing that type of work, and if that happens, you know, he could have quite a significant impact on his ability to remain in the UK if he gets caught out. But so there's businesses, recruitment agencies, or companies that are just had worked around it. But anyway, so from the purposes of your definition of a refugee and asylum seeker, if I'm a refugee now and I'm able to work, I'm still at risk of exploitation. Would you agree with that, Achi?
Yeah, anyone. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of people are making is that they think that migrant, asylum seeking refugees are exposed to to labor exploitation because of the immigration status. And from my perspective, the reason why people are exposed to labor exploitation is not because of our immigration status. It's simply because of the mechanism that remove our ability to cope and resist to the There's so many changes immigration law have brought into this country. So if you're a refugee, of course, you will also be exposed as a British national from BAME background will be exposed. The problem is not the immigration status that is the problem. The problem is the law is too complex for employer to understand. If you're a refugee who's been granted refugee status in the UK, you have made your application as an asylum seeker, and you've been granted refugee status in the UK, you shouldn't have any problem to work because you are not subject to any restriction. You are entitled to work. What is happening is that because of the lack of understanding of the term refugee, asylum seekers, and migrant, and employer lack of understanding of immigration law, they believe that refugees do not have the right to work. So because of that, they would deny the right to work of these individuals who have a refugee status. So because that individual need to feed his family, need to provide for his family, then that person who had the legal right to work will be pushed into labor exploitation. So what pushed that person into labor exploitation is discrimination. So that person is discriminated because of either the immigration status or the nationality. Because if you have the legal right to work as a refugee and the employer do not want to employ you, it's not because of your immigration status, it's because of your race. The employer believes that you do not have the right to work because you are somebody who look like me or somebody who look like you. But employer, even though technically it could fall into the Equality Act 2010, so therefore discrimination. But from what I see on the ground is that employer are now racist. Is that many, let's say 90% of employer, 99% of employer are now racist, but you have a tiny percent of employer who are using immigration law as an opportunity to openly express their racial, the racist views, using immigration law to support that. So when you're being victim of discrimination and you do not have this opportunity to work, then you fall into the informal market where you have to get cash in hand job to be able to feed your family. That's how the conflict between migration law and labor law create discrimination, which then lead to labor exploitation and then to forced labor exploitation because you have this kind of a pattern: discrimination, victim of labor exploitation, and then victim of forced labor exploitation. And the process is different whether you are an asylum seeker, a refugee, or a migrant. And if you're a migrant, this again will depend on your immigration rule. So you can be an EU citizen, for example, who have settled status. You could be an EU citizen who have pre-settled status. So it really depends on your immigration route.
Complicated. It's very complicated. But as you say, at the base of it all is that, the complications in the legal system and the definitions, migrant, asylum seeker, refugee, can inadvertently, an employer could just be discriminating against somebody who has the right to work because they can't face it. They don't know enough about it. They don't have an understanding about this, the processes in the system. So that kind of tells me, your organization, Migrants at Work, what is it that Migrants at Work, what is it you do then? What's your
So I set up Migrant at Work, it was in 2018. So The reason why, the background for this is when I arrived in the UK in 2000, I arrived in the UK in 2006. In 2009, I was working for a security company. So I'm an EU citizen as well. But of course, when you see me, I don't look like an EU citizen because for most people, EU citizen are white. So this has been...
I know how that feels, Achi.
Exactly. For many people, seeing me as an EU citizen, I say I'm EU citizen, say, okay, they don't say it, but you can see in the eye clearly that no, it can't be, because people see my skin before they see my passport. It's simple as that. So in 2009, I was working for a security company and I got a job with them in 2006. So I was already working 3 years prior to the day of the incident. So when they recruited me, I used my French national ID card, which at the time was a valid document to work. So in 2009, there was a 2P transfer. So a new company took over. So they were doing the right to work check because Immigration Act 2006 came into force in February, on the 28th of February. I believe it was on 28th of February 2008. So in 2009, when they started doing the right to work check, they checked in their file and they saw that I did not have my right to work permit. Then they asked me, can I provide my right to work permit? I said, well, I don't have it. They said, well, you need one. And I said, no, I don't need one because I'm an EU citizen. They said, well, you need one. So we had an argument going back and forth. Then I couldn't win because my employer is a big company. I'm just a little man and black. At the time, I did not have a lot of knowledge. So I reached out to the Home Office and explained the situation to the Home Office. The Home Office said, there is no problem. You have the right to work. Then I went back to my employer. I said, well, the Home Office said I have the right to work. They didn't provide me any document, but they said I have the right to work. My employer said, no, you don't have the right to work. We can, if you don't provide your work permit, we would have to dismiss you. I said, okay. Then I went to the French embassy. I said, well, this is what is happening. They said, no, you have the right to work. They can't do that. I said, okay. I went back to my employer. They said, no, we cannot employ you. So they said, you need a French passport. I said, well, I don't have a French passport and I don't need one. They said, well, you have a choice. Either you get your French passport or we sack you. Then I have to apply for a French passport, which I did not need. I have to spend money, which I did not have to spend. And at the time I was working, I was going to university. My wife was going to university and we had a new baby. And so I needed money, So I applied for the French passport. My French passport took about 2 weeks to come. And we still have, the email going back and forth. Then finally I received my passport. And during that time, I was working with a friend in the construction industry. Because of the situation that was going, I didn't know whether I will lose my job or not. So I was doing side job in this construction industry. And when I got there, they did not want to employ me as well because of the issue with my right to work. So I was working cash in hand. So you can see already how the conflict create the vulnerability and push me into kind of this exploitation. So once I got my passport, then they were at ease, and then I started working for them. But when I was having this problem, I contacted my trade union and I explained the problem to me. And what they were saying to me is that, well, the right to work is an immigration issue. I said, no, it's an employment issue. They said, well, we can't help you. You need to go see an immigration advisor. I didn't know who to go, or where to go and who to see. So I look on the internet and a friend told me you can go to see Citizen Affairs Bureau. And I went to them. They said, well, the right to work is not an immigration issue. It's an employment issue. I said, well, what do you want me to do? And then after that, then the company I was working for, there was a redundancy situation. I wasn't made redundant because I wouldn't keep quiet. Because the situation for me, there was something that was not right. So I was made redundant. And then a few years later, I joined a union as a regional organizer. And as I was going around organizing people, I realized that there was a problem that I was not the only one who was having the same problem. Okay. All people look like me, including British nationals, were having the same problem. Then I started to organize with the union. They did not want to help. They did not want to take on the issue that affected migrant workers. Then after 5 years working for them, I resigned because I couldn't take it anymore. And then I set up Migrant at Work in 2018. So what we do at Migrant at Work is to educate our community in a community environment. So to identify the early sign of discrimination and modern slavery. So then once we have provided this training to our community and they go to the workplace to identify this sign, then they come back to us if they have any issue, and we conduct some research, and we provide case support, representation at work, and advice. And then we get in touch with the employer. If the employer listens, then that's fine. If the employer does not listen, that's why we take it to court. And then we get support from different organizations to help us deal with the court case. But our work really is mainly on the prevention, because I believe that the impact of labor migration on labor right, it's an easy issue to resolve. This really has created what I call homegrown slavery, which is different. I see differently from modern slavery. So homegrown slavery is the impact of labor migration law on labor right. We create this intersection between migration and labor law where we migrants fall into because employers have difficulty to understand this conflict. So that's what we do at Migrant at Work.
Wow, again, the background to the story shows the passion about what you do, Achi, and why you do it. And I think it's, for me, somebody who's worked in recruitment for a long, long time, and also with regards to the work that that we do here with the anti-human trafficking and modern slavery in Scotland. This is a population or populations. This is an area of people that probably need a lot more support. And have been a little bit left out. And I think your story highlights how difficult it can be to get that, I suppose, that recognition and support and help. And you've done a lot to get there. And I think this is probably just the start of our journey to involving Achi in some of the work that we're doing in Scotland with regards to Scotland against modern slavery. I suppose for me, I'd just like to thank you for telling everybody who's listening. It's a very deep, quite a moving story, quite emotional, but it highlights the passion of individuals like yourself and organisations like Migrants at Work about what you're doing to help people who need help the most, and are being overlooked, not just by society, but business. I suppose, Achi, I'm going to kind of ask you a loaded question, but it sounds to me that businesses can have a role to play in helping these people, and it's quite easy. It's about recognising and understanding the differences, knowing a little bit about the law and legislation, and taking away some of those barriers to allow those people to work and basically live.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. And I think unlike modern slavery, which has different root causes, homegrown slavery, it's modern slavery, human trafficking or domestic trafficking, or however you want to call it, but it is abuses resulting from conflict between different migration law and labor law in practice. So the conflict is not in the law, the conflict is in the practice of the law. And the simple solution for that is education. And if employers educate the workforce, the management, but also migrant, and we migrant on the ground, we know our immigration right because we have to know that. But many don't know employment law. So we're trying to bridge this gap. And employers' role, they can help because this has an impact on them. I'll give you an example. We supported a refugee who had leave to remain in the country, to have leave to have the legal right to work. Her visa expired and she renewed it before it expired. So the employer said, well, it was a recruitment agency she was working for. The recruitment agency said, I'm sorry, you can't work. So they continued to employ her for about a month. And then they told her, you can no longer work because we noticed that your visa is expired. And she was explaining to them that she renewed before expired. So which means she has a legal right to continue to work, but the employer refused to allow her to work. So she worked for the employer for about a month. The employer dismissed her and refused to pay her her final salary and then withheld her pay. That is exploitation. So she got in touch with us and we provided support to her. And in the end, what happened is that, so she was working for a care home through the recruitment agency. In the end, we reached out to the care home and the care home said, well, she's a really good worker and we are struggling to find the staff and we cannot let her go, but we believe that she does not have the right to work. So we've one of our partner, immigration advisor partner, we got involved in this. So our immigration advisor partner looked into the immigration status of this individual and they confirmed that the person had a legal right to work. And then we got involved with the care home, and the care home worked with us. In the end, that person was removed from the recruitment agency and worked directly for the care home. So this shows that when employers get involved and work with us, they can only prevent illegal working offenses, illegal employing offenses. So therefore, they're not going to be fined because the individual had a legal right to work. And as a bonus, they get somebody who is qualified to work in a sector where employer can find the right skill. And for that individual, we prevented that individual from falling into labor exploitation and forced labor exploitation because that person now had a full-time job. So you can see here that a person working for a recruitment agency went for a precarious situation to a full-time job. Now the employer is happy and everybody's happy. So this is really about education and about employer getting involved. If they resolve this labor exploitation shortage because they learn about immigration law, then at the same time, they can prevent labor exploitation. So really it's a win-win for everyone, but employer needs to get involved, need to train this stuff. And that is really important. It's just about education, nothing else.
Great. Achi, that's a real insight. And you're right, it's employer education, and this will help fill the gaps that they may have in their workforce, but actually help the people that are needing that support. That's a really, really good example of it, what you spoke about as well with the recruitment agency and the care home. Achi Akim, it's been a delight speaking to yourself. I'm sure we're going to hear more from you over the coming months. So thank you for taking part in today's podcast. Achi Akim, Migrants at Work.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.